What do we know about Atlantis? Hey everyone, it's Alexa again and welcome back to another video. Atlantis has been called a utopia that vanished ages ago. It's been called everything from a lost city to a sunken continent to the home of Aquaman, and it's been a source of debate and controversy as to whether or not it ever truly existed. There are many questions about this legendary location, but few definitive answers. It makes you wonder, what do we actually know about Atlantis? Before we get into today's video, make sure that you're subscribed and ring the bell so that you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Where to begin? Atlantis was first mentioned in two dialogues of Plato in 360 BC. The Greek philosopher described it as a great island nation that sank into the sea some 10,000 years following a massive earthquake, or some other catastrophic event. Despite its modern interpretation as a utopia, Atlantis wasn't portrayed as such by Plato. It was more like a wealthy and highly advanced empire that was being corrupted by its own power. The legend of Atlantis persisted for ages, but until the late 19th century, it was never considered to be an actual place. Since then, all types of theories have abounded concerning Atlantis, and it continues to inspire a lot of popular culture, from literature to movies. But the actual historical existence of Atlantis still provides a source of great controversy. Was Atlantis in Antarctica? One of the wilder speculations regarding the location of Atlantis is this one. Did you know that a theory called crustal displacement makes the case that Antarctica might have once been free of ice 12,000 years ago? The theory goes that Atlantis was not an island nation, but a city that was located there long ago. For confirmation, some scholars cite the Piri-Reis map, which appeared in the 16th century. That controversial map is said to depict what appears to be the Antarctic coast hundreds of years before it was discovered. This doesn't agree with most accounts of Atlantis, which traditionally place it in the Atlantic Ocean, but it still merits a mention. The Black Sea Deluge. Even if you think the story of Atlantis is entirely fictional, it could have been inspired by real historic events. Did you know that around 5,600 years ago, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, about half of its current size? Experts say that the Bosphorus Strait was breached by the Mediterranean Sea and subsequently flooded the Black Sea. Civilizations that thrived along the shore were inundated by hundreds of feet of salt water over the short span of just 1 year. The hypothesis goes that when the refugees scattered, they spread stories of the catastrophe. Thousands of years later, those stories may have helped influence Plato's depiction of Atlantis. Zealandia. Here's another theory which argues that Atlantis was not necessarily located in the Atlantic Ocean. Zealandia is a huge landmass that broke away from Australia more than 100 million years ago and sank into the South Pacific Ocean. With an area of nearly 2 million square miles, it's larger than the Australian continent. Since it fits the perception of Atlantis being a sunken continent, Zealandia immediately drew those comparisons. Like the argument for Atlantis being in the Antarctic, this one is a wilder speculation, but it's still worth considering. In fact, the South Pacific has stories of islands like Yonaguni, which was part of the Solomon Islands. The story of it sinking into the ocean was also thought once to be mythical, but evidence of its existence was later discovered. Experts say that a series of undersea earthquakes and mega tsunamis sank the island ages ago. The Brazilian Atlantis. This theory suggests that Atlantis was a continent hidden off the coast of Brazil in the southern Atlantic Ocean. Samples of granite discovered 900 miles from Rio were discovered when researchers dredged a long mountainous rock formation called the Rio Grande Elevation, or the Rio Grande Rise. Scientists think the rocks were part of a continent that existed 100 million years ago, but sank into the ocean when Africa and South America drifted apart. That led experts to dub the discovery the Brazilian Atlantis. More testing was due on the rocks that were discovered, as well as the underwater geological formations. The Yonaguni Monument. Mysterious structures were discovered in 1987 off the coast of Yonaguni Jima, around 20 feet below the water. The immense rectangular formations appeared to be precisely built, with straight steps, walls, and columns, structures that resembled temples, paved streets, and a huge pyramid that rises 250 feet are claimed to be there. Some experts think the structures represent the remains of a pre-glacial city that once existed above the sea level some 10,000 years ago. And that, of course, ties in with the theories of this having once been the location of Atlantis. In fact, the place is often referred to as Japan's Atlantis. Atlantis equals Atlantic. The legend states that Atlantis sank into the Atlantic Ocean, so that's the area most often targeted by theorists, and the similarity between the names Atlantis and Atlantic make for a convenient match. We've already mentioned several locations in the Atlantic that have been cited as possible locations for Atlantis. Here are a few more. The Madeira Islands and the Canary Islands west of the Straits of Gibraltar are often suggested as possible sites. Also near the straits is a submerged island called Spartel. It lies about 56 meters underwater and is thought to have disappeared 12,000 years ago due to rising ocean levels. The story would seem to fit the legend of Atlantis. The Bimini Wall. In the 1970s, a paranormal theory emerged that added even more intrigue to the Atlantis legend. It was suggested that Atlantis was a continent that truly existed and was located off the Bahamas within an area of the Bermuda Triangle. The idea is that the leftover technology of Atlantis was somehow responsible for all the mysterious events that occur within the triangle. Adherents to this idea cite the Bimini Wall as proof. Located in North Bimini Island, the wall is an apparent structure that resembles an expansive pavement made from stones. It's also been described as a road or some other type of structure that represents the remnants of Atlantis, but a contradictory theory goes that these are naturally occurring rock formations. So, what do you think? Ancient anchors. Plato claimed that Atlantis was located near the Pillars of Heracles, or Hercules. Today, these landmasses are known as the Straits of Gibraltar that connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Some purported evidence of Atlantis may have shown up there in 2017, although in this case, researchers are referring to this as a lost city as opposed to a lost continent. Archaeologists found stone anchors that measure nearly 3 feet across and would have been used for a large vessel. Dating back some 4,000 years, the anchors are taken as evidence that ships might have docked in the area during the Bronze Age. The marsh where the artifacts were found was once an open bay adjacent to the Pillars of Heracles. Because of that, some researchers theorize that a harbor of Atlantis may have once existed there. The Book of Atlantis. Remember that we mentioned earlier how the popular perception of Atlantis didn't come about until the late 19th century? In 1882, a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World was published by a U.S. congressman named Ignatius L. Donnelly. In addition to being a political figure, he was also an amateur scientist and a writer. He was among the first to take Plato's story as a mostly factual historical account. But Donnelly went further, claiming that nearly all advancements in civilization and technology could be traced to this ancient, sunken island. Other writers would later expand on those ideas and add their own theories. Donnelly's book inspired so much popular interest in the subject that it's often credited with helping to keep the legend of Atlantis alive through to the present day. Santorini and ancient Thera. This is a Greek island in the Aegean Sea, and its story has some interesting parallels to Atlantis. More than 4,000 years ago, it was known as Thera and was part of the advanced Minoan civilization. Regarded as Europe's first great civilization, the Minoans constructed paved roads and ornate palaces, and they were the first Europeans to develop a written language. But at the apex of their power, the Minoans suddenly disappeared. Around 3,600 years ago, the civilization was taken out by one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in recorded history. An estimated 10 million tons of rock and ash were spewed into the atmosphere. Tsunamis later followed and wiped out Minoan cities. You can see why Santorini, or Thera, is often cited as being the strongest possibility for having been the historical location of Atlantis. We've learned a lot about Atlantis so far, and we still have one more important fact to go. But before we get there, we've got a question for you. What do you think about these theories about Atlantis? Do you have your own? Let us know in the comments below. Maybe there's nothing more to know. We'll end where we began, with Plato. Plenty of researchers say that the only place Atlantis ever existed was within the great philosopher's imagination. It could be that Plato dreamed up the story of Atlantis as a type of morality tale, where its downfall represented the gods punishing the pride of humans. Aside from Plato's dialogues, there are no written records known to exist about Atlantis. And even though we've presented a few possibilities for the existence of this legendary location, modern technology has yet to detect a provable trace of that sunken civilization. But even if Atlantis never existed at all, there could be certain historical events, like Thera, that helped inspire the story, and those are definitely worth investigating.